It was described as the longest-running protest in modern American history, although you would not have known that from the scant media coverage, and it eventually made a difference. An oil pipeline through the U.S. Midwest will be rerouted, and a group of Native American tribes, backed by thousands of supporters, have succeeded, for now, in protecting their water supply and some sacred burial grounds. The turnaround, both the decision and the increased media interest thereafter, exposed just how poorly this story had been covered until that point. There were some logistical challenges. The protest camp is a long way from the media centers on both coasts, but the lack of coverage went much deeper than that, reflecting at least two institutional biases in the U.S. news media against environmental issues, as well as stories about Native Americans. However, a recent pair of events changed the entire story arc. Both involved another institution the media tend to treat more favorably, the U.S. military. The first was a show of support, solidarity from veterans, men and women who had spent time in uniform. Then the U.S. Army's Corps of Engineers, for environmental reasons, denied the construction company permission to route the Dakota Access Pipeline through a lake. This is a multi-layered story, and when you peel away some of those layers, it's a case study on the kinds of issues where the American news media frequently fall short. Our starting point this week is the Standing Rock Indian Reservation in North Dakota. North Dakota is what Americans call a flyover state, visible to travelers from the air, but seldom does it get on the air, a black hole in the U.S. news landscape. That changed this past week with the decision to reroute a pipeline that will stretch from North Dakota to Illinois. But prior to that, a protest led by thousands of Native Americans that had been running for more than 6 months went largely unseen in the mainstream news media.
The New York Times, CNN, and Fox News just weren't on the ground early enough. This comes down to mainstream media not being accountable to marginalized groups and not doing the type of local reporting that's so critical to the health of journalism as an institution.
It is astounding how little coverage they have gotten over these months. But this very much goes in lockstep with a lack of coverage of climate change. Add to it a group of people who are marginalized by the corporate media, Native Americans, and you have a combination that vanishes them. And yet these protests have only intensified. The resistance camps have only grown over the months without the media megaphone of the corporate media.
The way that Indians make news is through something called the WD4 rule.
There is singing, there is dancing. Everybody here is so happy.
Which is they have to be warriors, drunks, dying, dancing, or drumming. And I think a lot of coverage is focused on stories that open up with protesters out there drumming or dancing or singing.
Drum beats, cheers, and tears.
I think a lot of that might stem from stereotypes.
When you have peaceful water protectors marching up a rural road, and they are met with water cannons, they're met with rubber bullets, it is absolutely critical that journalists not be afraid to be there, to show what's happening, to go to where the silence is.
The logistical challenges of covering this story have been enormous. The closest airport is 1 hour away from the camps at Cannonball. The weather has grown worse as winter moved in to the upper Midwest. The independent journalists who went in to cover over social media what major news outlets were initially ignoring could not even count on a steady Wi-Fi connection, congregating on what came to be known as Facebook Hill, hoping to get a signal. The first in, though, were the locals, indigenous media organizations that focus on Native issues, and news outlets from North Dakota covering their own backyard. Journalists late to the story arrived to find few hotels to accommodate them or restaurants to feed them. That lack of basic infrastructure left many sleeping in their cars.
This is happening about an hour south of Bismarck, North Dakota, but once you arrive in Bismarck, you have to drive through some very snowy roads to get to this protest site. We've gone through a blizzard then and then another blizzard this week, and that can be kind of complicated. It's also very expensive for news organizations to send reporters out here for an extended period of time to cover an issue like this.
The journalists who got there chronicled the treatment of activists by police and security guards. In one cruel twist, in a story largely about protecting lakes, rivers, and people from a potential pipeline catastrophe, sub-zero temperatures did not stop the authorities from drenching activists with water cannons. Tear gas was deployed, tasers as well. Some reporters turned into casualties. Stories. The woman behind this camera was hit by a police rubber bullet mid-interview. And a prominent national journalist ended up in court facing rioting charges that would eventually be dropped. All Amy Goodman of Democracy Now! Would plead guilty to was practicing journalism.
It was September 3rd. We were covering a group of Native Americans who came upon an excavation site, the Standing Rock Sioux, considered sacred. The bulldozers are still going, and they're yelling at the men in hard hats. And the people started demanding that the bulldozers stop. We were filming all of this, and the security guards unleashed dogs and pepper spray. We uploaded that video that evening. Ma'am, your dog just bit this protester. Within a few days, 14 million views. All the networks were playing this video footage of the savagery of the attacks. 5 days later, the governor called out the National Guard of North Dakota to take on the water protectors and issued an arrest warrant for me. I mean, this was ludicrous, an arrest warrant.
I've noticed in covering social movements over the years that some of the most egregious abuses of power happen when journalists aren't around. And that's also why journalism is so integral to a functioning democracy. But I think one of the biggest developments that's come out of Standing Rock is the quality of journalism being produced by people on the ground there.
The arrival of some 2,000 U.S. military veterans who came to support the tribal leaders and activists changed perceptions. Later that same day, the Army's Corps of Engineers changed everything, ordering the pipeline company to find another route. The activists who call themselves water protectors, who don't like it when the media describe them simply as protesters, have prevailed for now. And they have the backing of the White House for now. But they know Washington awaits a changing of the guard. The Trump administration could change everything again, and that their efforts over these past 6 months and the intervention of the veterans could all come to nothing.
The veterans coming to Standing Rock has captured the attention of the national media. There's a lot of reporters who have been here this past week to document the veterans' arrival. And so the conditions out at this camp in combination with the veterans coming, it's really kind of a crazy scene down there right now with so many people and such harsh conditions if you're out at the camps. And so I think that the media is really paying attention to that right now.
There's a lot of reasons to be depressed about journalism these days, especially in our collective failure to cover the campaign of Donald Trump. But what gives me hope is the quality of the stories that are coming out of these Indigenous-led publications and collectives of journalists.
The limited amount of coverage that was done on the Dakota Access Pipeline issue at least awakened a lot of America to the fact that American Indians still exist and are still there and are still fighting the same battle that they've been fighting for the last few hundred years. What the media is missing right now is that this will happen again. This will happen somewhere else in the country, and because there's not a very particularly good grasp of what the issues and history are that made this particular incident happen, that they're going to miss it when it happens again.